Isaac Airy Mackenzie.
And me.
Hi, good evening. My name is Julie Larson, and I'm here to give you a persuasive speech on climate change. Climate change. What if we know our job as human beings is to leave this earth intact for future generations? As Gandhi says, be the change you wish to see. A lot of my knowledge on climate change comes from the about 6 years of reading scientific studies by climate experts and scientists, and my direct involvement in the development of a program called Control-Alt-Delete Climate Change, which is based out of Canada, along with numerous documentaries and my degree in cultural anthropology. This helps me understand the instruments being used in collecting and data collected using radiocarbon dating. Also, my education as a dive master. Global warming is real, and the sea levels are rising, and the Earth's temperatures are heating up, causing problems such as wildfires, droughts, melting of ice caps, and glaciers. I do believe Earth warms and cools in normal cycles, but the impacts humans have had on Earth since the industrialized revolution has sped up this process and will continue to unless we all take a stand for what is our moral responsibility to future generations and clean up our actions and use clean, efficient energy options such as wind, solar, hydroelectric, and transition to a less dependency on burning of fossil fuels. And the only way for that to happen is for everyone to get involved. Some opposing views on climate change suggest it isn't happening at all, and also climate change is the result of Earth's natural heating and cooling processes. One of these supporters is a woman named Sally Balinas. She has an extensive background, a PhD in astrophysicist, and she's a senior scientist at the George C. Marshall Institute. Also an astrophysicist at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Solar, Stellar, and Planetary Sciences. The reason why I tell you her extensive title is because she seems very qualified to make a stand on climate change. Also, her credentials sound like that of an expert. Balinas did also co-author and research that supports the theory that CO2 levels are not rising as fast as other scientists predict. Another one of these climate change debunkers and theorists is Larry Bell, a full tenure professor of architecture at the University of Houston, and his title is Professor of Space Architecture. He talks about climate corruption. He also wrote a book on this. His basic theory is that global warming is a hoax, and as a result of this debunking, he published several articles in Forbes magazine along with Newsmax. He firmly believes climate change is not man-made. From ExxonSecrets.org, he also believes and was stated saying that sea levels are rising due to Earth's natural warming. Okay, so this has been supported by a lot of scientists, although I want to tell you that the support of this scientist claiming climate change isn't real has gone down drastically over the last 6 years that I've been studying it, and for reasons as such. When I told you about Sally Balinas, and she seems like a credible source. However, Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysicists in the Solar, Stellar, and Planetary Science Division, their major donor contributor is a man named David Koch, otherwise known as the Koch brothers, who owns the second largest privately held company in the U.S., oil companies and paper-producing companies. His long list of accomplishments include places that you would probably hear of, like Gander Mountain, Canadian tar sands, the Holiday Gas Companies, and American greeting cards. So Mr. Koch and his family, as being one of the second largest companies in the U.S., has a large stake in whether or not he can produce greeting cards anymore, or whether or not the oil companies will be changing over to efficient means of natural energy. One of the other things that I want to talk about, Balinas' research on climate change was co-authored by 11 other scientists who also resigned from this after maybe them learning their own scientific information on climate change. They all decided that they didn't support her theory anymore on climate change. Follow the Money is my a basic premise to you. Also, the credibility of Larry Bell comes into question. In several articles, he's listed as a professor of space architecture. Well, what is space architecture? It's the planning of building possible cities or vehicles in space. So, yeah, that all sounds pretty cool, but does this make him an expert on climate change? He has no degree in astrophysics or geoengineering. In conclusion, there's enough supporting scientific evidence that the sea levels are rising and Earth's temperatures are heating up from increased CO2 emissions in the atmosphere, having a direct result on Arctic ice caps and reducing glaciers, and also the disappearances of glaciers entirely. Mount Kilimanjaro is expected to be gone by 2030. And that comes from Live Science. And then if you also look at Bangladesh right now, half of the low-lying levels of Bangladesh are underwater and all the people are being displaced. The opposing views of global warming is not man-made and global warming is Earth's natural heating process and sea levels are not rising. There's just not enough science there to support it anymore. In my view, I believe through extensive research that man's actions have sped up the process of the Earth's natural warming cycle. And as a direct result, these ice caps are melting, the sea levels are rising, superstorms are happening, along with major droughts and increased wildfires. Major companies with invested interest in the oil and coal industries have begun giving unprecedented amounts of hundreds of $millions to conservative anti-global warming companies, and that's according to The Guardian, which is a pretty credible source. Also, the Koch brothers gave over $100 million to climate debunking companies and organizations. In closing, it is our moral responsibility to future generations to shift our dependencies on products that increase carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere, and also be a part of the change that you wish to see. Get involved in programs like to control, delete climate change, and of course, reduce, reuse, and recycle. Thank you and have a good night.
Yeah. They're still there.